And our vision is to surprise and inspire the world. Full stop. And we had a long debate about the world. One of the trustees said, shouldn't it be Northeastern Ohio? I said, no, North. How many qualifications is that? Northeastern Ohio. No. And then you say, well, should it be to surprise and inspire mainland USA? Does that mean you stop inspiring at the Canadian border? It's a nonsense. And because we do a lot of things digitally now with streaming and various things, and in time commission more education projects, which will end up going around the world, why would you limit the ambition to the borders of the USA? It doesn't make any sense. So if you say the vision is to surprise and inspire the world, a vision is like a mirage. You're probably never going to achieve it. It's a direction of travel. So if your ambition is of the world, then head that way. Don't stop halfway. I said to the team, I came from the other side of the world. I was inspired and surprised by Playhouse Square. And the reason surprise is in there is because the surprise is that the gauntlet being laid down about the profile. So the surprise is I had no idea Cleveland housed this organization. So we're going to tell them. We're going to tell Broadway, we're going to tell the theatre folk of this country, we're going to tell the world through broadcast and streaming, and that's where we're heading.
Let's discover what people are building in the greater Cleveland community. We are telling the stories of Northeast Ohio's entrepreneurs, builders, and those supporting them. Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today I had the real pleasure of speaking with Craig Hassall, CEO of Playhouse Square here in Cleveland, Ohio. Craig is a mainstay in the international theater community, with decades of experience operating and curating the most prestigious and frequented venues across Europe and in Australia. Over his career, in addition to his role as CEO of the Royal Albert Hall in London, he was also the CEO at Opera Australia, which oversees the Sydney Opera House, and he was the managing director of the English National Ballet. He also held senior roles for major projects including the 2000 and 2012 Olympic Games in both Sydney and London respectively, in addition to many other endeavors. In 2022, Craig was named as the new president and CEO of Playhouse Square, one of the world's premier art districts and second largest performing arts center in the United States, outside of New York City. Playhouse Square has an amazing history here in Cleveland, dating back to the early 1920s, and today is the home of a plethora of resident organizations like the City Club of Cleveland, the Cleveland Ballet, Cleveland International Film Festival, Cleveland Playhouse, Cleveland State University Department of Theater and Dance, Dance Cleveland, Great Lakes Theater, Tri-C Jazz Festival, and a whole lot more, in addition to its role as one of Broadway's premier touring partners. I personally love the opportunity to sit down with Craig. As a fellow non-native Clevelander, it is always very fun for me to find a kindred spirit with a shared appreciation for this city, the excellence within it, and the opportunity ahead of it on a world stage. In this great conversation, Craig and I unpack his love of performance arts, the arc of his professional career and his path to Cleveland, the history and present state of Playhouse Square today, and his ambitious vision for the future going forward. So please enjoy my conversation with Craig Hassall after a brief message from our sponsor. Lay of the Land is brought to you by John Carroll University's Boler College of Business, widely recognized as one of the top business schools in the region. As we've heard time and time again from entrepreneurs here on Lay of the Land, many of whom are proud alumni of John Carroll University, success in this ever-changing world of business requires a dynamic and innovative mindset, deep understanding of emerging technologies and systems, strong ethics, leadership prowess, acute business acumen, all qualities nurtured through the Boler College of Business. With 4 different MBA programs of study spanning professional, online, hybrid, and 1-year flexible, the Boler College of Business provides flexible timelines and various class structures for each MBA track, including online, in-person, hybrid, and asynchronous. all to offer the most effective options for you, including the ability to participate in an elective international study tour, providing unparalleled opportunities to expand your global business knowledge by networking with local companies overseas and experiencing a new culture. The career impact of a Bowler MBA is formative and will help prepare you for this future of business and get more out of your career. To learn more about John Carroll University's Bowler MBA programs, please go to business.jcu.edu. The Bowler College of Business is fully accredited by AACSB International, the highest accreditation a college of business can have. So I want to start with the question that I imagine you get all the time, which I know that you do because we talked about it before turning on record here. But I think it would be best served with a little context. So like yourself, I'm not a Clevelander by origin, born and raised in New York City. So, I mean, you probably already know where this is going. If we were to do one of those pattern recognition exercises where they show you two of something and you were supposed to intuit the third. If we played that game with, say, the Sydney Opera House and Royal Albert Hall and then proceeded to ask for the third, I am not sure that Playhouse Square would be the institution that comes to most people's mind. Maybe Carnegie Hall.
Maybe, or Lincoln Center.
Lincoln Center.
Something. Yes. Spot on. It's like that joke t-shirt that says Sydney, London, Cleveland.
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, Cleveland's the joke, you know, it's which I'm sure we'll come to.
But it's not a joke.
It's not a joke.
It's not a joke. And I personally am elated to know that you are here because I also recognize Cleveland as a great city, severely underrated, and very optimistic about where it can go from here. And just think much more highly of Cleveland than its stereotypes and historical backdrop may suggest about it.
But, you know, even the stereotypes are limited to the United States. I mean, I'd heard of Cleveland before I came here. I didn't have a view, positive or negative. And my friends who've come to visit me, and there have been quite a few of them, have had no view of Cleveland. So the negativity that's around Cleveland comes from the US, weirdly.
Wow.
And a lot of it comes from Cleveland, I've noticed as well. Which,
sure, yes.
You know, is odd.
It is.
Yeah, the world is neutral about Cleveland.
There's probably some wisdom in that. We'll come back to that. I'll proceed to then ask the question, which is one I think that comes genuinely from a place of bewilderment from a lot of Clevelanders who can't, fully wrap their heads around why someone on their own volition would come to Cleveland.
Yeah, well,
so why are you here?
I'll try and answer it. So it's not because I've had a breakdown, which is what a lot of my friends thought, or I've committed some terrible crime.
Right.
I'm on the run from the law, and they'll never find me in Cleveland, Ohio. No, it's I was approached by a headhunter from Atlanta.
Yeah,
and honestly, she was great. I mean, I've told this story 1,000 times, but she said, "Now, Craig, I have this opportunity for you. It's in Cleveland, Ohio. Now, don't hang up. Let me explain." And she started explaining, and I did say, look, that's very flattering, but I'm not sure I would move from London, from the Royal Albert Hall, one of the most famous venues in the world, to a place I've never heard of, Playhouse Square, in a city I've kind of heard of, but I'm not really sure where it is. And she said, well, let's just listen to me. And I persevered. And it wasn't until I came over, I had a look around, and what swung me, probably three things, actually. One of them we've discussed before we started recording. The first thing was the theaters, which I'm sure you've seen. The theaters are spectacularly good.
Stunning.
They're not just beautiful. They're restored. They work operationally really well. They are stunning to look at. The sight lines are good, and there's plenty of them. So that was the first thing. And the second, I was interviewed by a whole lot of trustees, and the attitude of the trustees was so positive and so welcoming and professional and supportive. And, I've worked in the arts most of my life, and I've never really experienced trustees with such a positive attitude to the place, such pride in what they are doing as trustees, not-for-profit trustees, and their enthusiasm for what's on stage and everything else as well. So that was the second thing. And the third thing was Cleveland. I was taken around. Margie Judd, who's one of our trustees, has a company called Executive Arrangements. Their job is to basically make you fall in love with Cleveland. That's what they exist for. And I had this whistle-stop tour one afternoon where we were driven around Edgewater, where I now live. Little Italy, had lunch there.
Yeah.
We whizzed past the West Side markets and down to the flats. So it was this crazy whirlwind tour of Cleveland. And because I had no reference point at all, my view was, this place is amazing. This is a really big little city, and it's got everything that you'd need. Although, as we discussed before, no traffic. There's no traffic on the roads. And so Cleveland was the third clincher for me. And that's probably going to be surprising to people listening to this who are from New York or Chicago and LA. because they just don't know. And I didn't know. And I now proselytize about Cleveland.
Right. No, I think we're kindred spirits in that way. Can you take us through part of your upbringing, growing up in the countryside of New South Wales? I'd love to start with what inspired you to get interested in the world of art, theater, performance.
Yeah, sure. I'll try and be brief, but this story will end up in Cleveland. So I'll start with Cleveland and then go backwards. One thing I like about Cleveland is the attitude, which we discussed before the podcast, the attitude of the people here. It's Midwest values, which means people are generally, and I would say almost without exception for me, friendly, welcoming, genuine, honest.
Yes.
But not hokey and not parochial. They're very proud of Cleveland, but they wouldn't say it's the best city in the world and there's nowhere else you want to live and blah, blah, blah. So they love this city. They're very proud of it, but not to the point of ridicule. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then I go right back, and I grew up in the countryside in Australia, a little country town on a farm. And Australian rural folk are very much like Clevelanders. Same thing. They travel, they're well educated, they have views of the world, but they love where they're from, and they're incredibly welcoming and friendly. They'll take you into the home, give you a meal, show you around the farm, and so on and so on. I didn't really want to be a farmer. I was clear right from the get-go. It wasn't my thing. I'm not good with sheep. I know, right. That's not my thing. I won a scholarship to go to boarding school in Sydney, which was the best thing that could have happened to me because I suddenly was in an urban environment with people like me that liked shows on stage and liked music and drama. And I enjoyed sport. I wasn't very good at it, but I played every sport there was. Cricket was very big in Australia.
Yeah.
I was terrible at cricket, but I really enjoyed it. And how I got into this world was the school I went to was a very sport-heavy school. Like we did really well at the head of the river, which is a big rowing competition. And rugby union was big. Cricket was huge, of course. Yep. And I tried all those things, and that was fun. But I really loved drama. And I had a really terrific English teacher and a really great French teacher. I mean, so weird learning French in Australia. I think, why on earth? How is that helpful? Well, not really is the answer. I did French and Latin. Latin was less useful. No, actually, Latin was more useful than French, I'd say, because of etymology and so on. But anyway.
Yes.
But I had one great French teacher and one great English teacher, and they went out of their way to take us, rowdy, hapless rural boys to shows. We went to see the Sydney Theatre Company and Sydney Symphony Orchestra and the Australian Chamber Orchestra and the Australian Ballet and Opera Australia. And I just gained a really substantial appreciation of the performing arts, which I would never have got if I'd stayed in the country. I would have seen the odd touring show, but not even anything like you have here in the US. So I'm so grateful to those two gentlemen to this day that they opened my eyes to this whole world I had no clue about. And it's actually one thing that I've championed all the way through my career. We're doing even now at Playhouse Square, is this notion of pipeline career awareness. A bit like you're saying with entrepreneurship, doing the same thing in the arts. There are so many jobs in my world that young kids, like I was, have no clue about.
Yeah.
They may want to work in the world that I'm in, but for them, they think that means being a musician or a singer or an actor.
Right.
They have no idea about lighting, sound, makeup, dresses, stage management, crew. There's so many jobs in this world. And so I've always championed making young people aware of all the jobs we have in our world, because we need people to work in our industry. And the more aware they are, the earlier, the better. So that kicked me off, and I never looked back after that.
Well, and then I imagine we could spend the entirety of the conversation on the myriad of experiences you've had since, from the Sydney Opera House, Royal Albert Hall, like we mentioned already, but organizing the Olympics in Sydney and London, the English National Ballet, I believe.
Yeah. Just pick one. I don't know.
Well, how do you, when you reflect on the arc of your career, think about the threads that tie it together, the themes of it,
sure.
the salient takeaways? What kind of inspired you to each subsequent, step in your journey?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it probably ties back to a lot of what you do with your world. There's a great saying that says, what happens if you don't take any risks? Nothing. And it's true. And I've taken risks all my life with my career, with productions, with people, with hires, young people. And it's usually always paid off. The Sydney Olympic Games, I was a young guy. I was about early 30s, and I was given the job of running the cultural program of the Sydney Olympics. Now, the guy that I replaced had been to Atlanta in, was it 96, I think? Yeah. And he had a terrible time. He came back from Atlanta and resigned. So the word on the street in Sydney was, this is a poison chalice. Do not take this job. And I was young. I thought, well, what the hell? I was offered the job and I thought, well, I have nothing to lose. I could just let it go. So I leapt in boots and all, and I hired people that I trusted and knew who were also very young. So we were a very young team. And we'd have these, what I call come to Jesus meetings, where basically he said down, he'd go, okay, guys, we have to solve this. Who's got an idea? And some, Stephanie, my marketing person, would go, well, we could try X, Y, and Z. I go, well, that sounds good. And honestly, it was as random as that.
Yeah.
And we'd followed up with a bit of science, but it was a case of just leaping in and trying things out. And because it was Sydney, it was the year 2000 or just before, and we'd never hosted the games before. The world didn't know much about Sydney. So whatever we did was the first time it had been done. So we couldn't really get it wrong because whatever we did was the thing. It was the touchstone,
Right.
And we put on 4 festivals over 4 years. And in the final year, which was the year of the games, when, the whole world came to Sydney or watched us on television, we put on a 6-week festival, which had the Sydney Opera House and all the galleries and theatres. And it was just unbelievable. It really worked. We had some things didn't work. We had one music festival, which was a bit of a disaster. It actually just rained and rained and rained. A weekend before the opening ceremony, it was a nightmare, but that wasn't our fault. But in the final analysis, I thought, well, we just kept pushing forward, trying stuff out and taking risks every day for 4 years, and it paid off.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I like that saying. Without risk, nothing happens.
Nothing happens. Exactly. Actually, coming to Cleveland was a risk,
Well, absolutely.
Yeah. I just leapt in and thought, well, if it doesn't work, I'll go back to London. It's
right.
fine. Yeah.
I mean, lots of unknowns as a part of that step.
Yeah.
Well, let's set some context for Playhouse Square.
Sure.
So while I was reading up on Playhouse Square, I'd come across this line that I thought was kind of memorable and funny, but it was that the saving of Playhouse Square is, kind of a leading triumph in one of the top 10 successes in Cleveland history. I don't know what the other 9 are, but to the degree that Cleveland has historically prioritized parking, for example, over, its kind of rich heritage, architectural beauty, Millionaires Row is right next to where Playhouse Square is, or at least it used to be. How did you approach, kind of the understanding of the history of Playhouse Square?
The history of Playhouse Square really chimed with me personally when I heard the story.
And its survival.
And Ray Shepherdson he was like in his 20s. This is the guy who led the restoration and the saving of those buildings. He got his mates together and they put on a cabaret for like 2.5 years, the Jacques Brel. And that's amazing. That's the arts, coming to the fore. And the people of Cleveland would go and see this show again and again and again, knowing that every time they went, it cost them a few bucks to go, the money would help support and restore these theatres. And the parking thing, it's so funny you say that. I come from a city where no one has a car. You jump on the tube or you get a bus. And if you dare to drive, you're an idiot because it takes you twice as long. And I come here where, as we discussed before, they have these amazing motorways with no cars, but everyone has a car. So you have to drive in Cleveland. I'm sure that was the culture from 100 years ago, with the motor industry being so big here and so on. So when you imagine now, it seems heinous to think about it, but the fact that those theatres were going to be razed to the ground.
Yeah, demolished.
Demolished for surface parking, because parking was so important back in the day, 50 years ago. The fact they were saved is extraordinary. And what I like to say is, those theatres were rescued by the people of Cleveland, the restoration funded by the people of Cleveland, and now they're supported by the people of Cleveland. The Playhouse Square has, I don't know if you know this, has the highest number of season ticket holders in the country. These are the people who subscribe to 7 Broadway shows, 44,000 people. And the next highest city is, I think it's Cincinnati or Chicago, somewhere, it's 22,000.
Wow.
So people in Cleveland love the arts. Look at the Rock Hall, look at the museum, the orchestra. There's a really kind of disproportionately high appreciation of the arts in Cleveland. Look at jazz, look at the number of bands in pubs and things around. It's really, really strong here. And that's a good DNA for a city to have, I would say.
Absolutely. What were some of the other historical precedents, moments from Playhouse Square that stood out to you in your study of it?
Oh, wow. Well, if you kind of go backwards, if you look at Playhouse Square now, its future is assured, I would say, touch wood, in that it has this really interesting portfolio of theatres and real estate. Playhouse Square owns the Crowne Plaza Hotel, the Lumen Apartments, which they built, office buildings, all the theatres, and other bits and pieces around that neighborhood. So it's got a really strong business base.
Yeah.
And then if you go backwards, the highlights since they saved the theatres were the building of more theatres, so that there's the 4 sort of heritage theatres, and there's now about 14 performance spaces. So the idea stream collaboration in the Idea Centre was a really important moment when public broadcasting came into the Playhouse Square, and so that extended the portfolio and the partnership with Idea Stream. That was, I'd say, really a high watermark for Playhouse Square. But I'd also say the assembling of all these resident companies over the years. I've had experience, I've been a resident company. So at the Sydney Opera House, I ran Opera Australia, which is the opera company. So I was a resident of the Sydney Opera House. And that was fine because we got on very well, but it wasn't always the case. In London, there's a place called South Bank. It's an art centre. And then famously, there are about 5 or 6 resident orchestras of South Bank.
Yeah.
And word on the street is the orchestras hate South Bank and South Bank hates the orchestras, but they're stuck in this unholy marriage where they have to get certain dates and so on and so on. It's a really unhealthy dynamic. At Playhouse Square, they have 8 resident companies, most recently City Club, which, City Club is a great institution. I'm sure you know them very well. And then alongside that, you have, Cleveland Playhouse and Great Lakes and the Film Festival and Tri-C Jazz. I mean, there's so many companies, Cleveland Ballet. And it's a really good dynamic. No one's competing for audiences or donors or space or dates is a bit of a wrangle often because everyone wants the Connor Palace at a certain date, of course. But actually it all works out. And I'd say that's one of the nicest parts of the personality of Playhouse Square is the fact that it can have this association of 8 resident companies. And actually, most recently, we added Karamu House as an affiliate company because they're not resident. They don't need to be. They've got a fantastic theatre in East Cleveland, but they're an affiliate company. So we're setting up this new partnership where we're going to have an artistic and operational partnership with Karamu to help them, and they'll help us. So it's a really good dynamism between the 2 organizations. So that's a high watermark as well. And then I'd say since the other theatres are built, just building the real estate portfolio to benefit the not-for-profit status of Playhouse Square. So, most real estate developers make money for their shareholders or their family or whatever it is. Any money that we make is only for Playhouse Square, meaning for the buildings or for education programs or commissioning works. What a great setup is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I'm curious, as you, ultimately opted to take the job, that the recruiter reached out to you about, how you thought about what your mandate is. And particularly, I think it would be interesting to hear, in contrast to what it was at this, the Sydney Opera House or the Royal Albert Hall. What is your goal?
Sure. That's a good question. So I might contrast it with English National Ballet, actually.
Sure.
So it's similar in a way in that I moved from Sydney to London to run English National Ballet just after the Olympic Games.
Yeah.
And then I moved from London to Cleveland for Playhouse Square. So when I arrived at the ballet company, they were in a parlous state financially and artistically. So my job was to rescue the company. I had to sort them out. Not artistically, because I had an artistic director, but the 2 go hand in hand. So what you put on stage obviously affects how much money you make at the box office and so on and so on. So restructured the regional touring model of the company. We set out smaller touring parties. We changed repertoire. We adjusted our London dates. We had more dates in London because London sells really well if you're doing the Nutcracker or Swan Lake. We renegotiated with the Royal Albert Hall to do big ballets at the Royal Albert Hall. So we had a lot of work to do. I think me and my senior team at the ballet to get it back on track and steady the ship. And worked. We were back in the black about a year later, and we had more invitations to tour throughout Europe and to China and Australia and places. So it worked, and the company was in a good position operationally and financially and artistically. So that was great.
Yeah.
I contrast that with Playhouse Square. I didn't come here to rescue Playhouse Square. I arrived, the company is firing all cylinders, in the wake of Gina Venacci, who's before me, and Art Falco before her. They'd run the company really well. It was in great shape artistically, operationally, and financially. So to your question, you think, well, what am I doing here? And I think the answer is, and I said to the trustees, I think my job here is to, first of all, ensure that continues.
Right.
But the biggest challenge for me, I would say, is this question of profile and brand of Playhouse Square within Cleveland, within Ohio, nationally and internationally. And so we've just done you do all these vision and value statements. When you start with a new company, the first thing you do is, business plan. So we're doing all that. And our vision is to surprise and inspire the world, full stop. And we had a long debate about the world. One of the trustees said, shouldn't it be Northeastern Ohio? I said, no, North. How many qualifications is that? Northeastern Ohio? No. and then you say, well, should a beach surprise and inspire mainland USA? Does that mean you stop inspiring at the Canadian border? It's a nonsense. And because we do a lot of things digitally now with streaming and various things, and in time commission more education projects, which will end up going around the world, why would you limit the ambition to the borders of the USA? It doesn't make any sense. So if you say the vision is to surprise and inspire the world, a vision is like a mirage. You're probably never going to achieve it. It's a direction of travel.
Yes.
So if your ambition is of the world, then head that way. Don't stop halfway. I said to the team, I came from the other side of the world. I was inspired and surprised by Playhouse Square. And the reason surprise is in there is because the surprise is that the gauntlet being laid down about the profile. So the surprise is I had no idea Cleveland housed this organization. So we're going to tell them. We're going to tell Broadway. We're going to tell the theater folk of this country. We're going to tell the world through broadcast and streaming. And that's where we're heading. So that's, I think, the challenge I have ahead of me is to keep the ship, gold-plated and keep it successful, but go to the next level in terms of profile and brand.
Yeah. Well, that's spectacular. I think it hits on a theme or a pattern, a topic that's come up, so frequently in conversations on this podcast in particular, but it's a recognition of people who are building things here to raise the bar of ambition. We can actually just think bigger, and we don't have to tolerate a mediocrity and average, which I say, from a place of love and knowing that we can do that here.
Definitely. And, I'll give a plug for the mayor. The mayor has the same ambition. He's very focused. He's very young. He's very ambitious and very focused. He's a bright guy. I got to know him when I started. Actually, before I started, I met with him. And it's really helpful to have someone like the mayor and the county executive, Chris Rena. They're aligned in their ambition, and having those two very key roles in a city like Cleveland aligned means that for not just in my world, but in entrepreneurship, in business, in manufacturing, in hospitality and tourism, you can really kick goals if you're aligned politically in that way. And that's really helpful. So I think it's great. The mayor, he could sit in his laurels and just go, well, Cleveland is what it is and just do your best. But he doesn't. He's really, what I love, one of his great things is this 15-minute city. This thing about, let's create a city where it's 15 minutes wherever you want to go, whether you're walking, driving, you're downtown, wherever you are. And suddenly that's really easy to imagine. And the best goals, the ones you go, oh, I see, you want to paint the building blue. Oh, yeah, well, let's get on with it. And that's why I think his ambition is really strong and easy to leap on board to help support that ambition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Lay of the Land is brought to you by Impact Architects and by 90. As we share the stories of entrepreneurs building incredible organizations in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio, Impact Architects has helped hundreds of those leaders, many of whom we have heard from as guests on this very podcast, realize their own visions and build these great organizations. I believe in Impact Architects and the people behind it so much that I have actually joined them personally in their mission to help leaders gain focus, align together, and thrive by doing what they love. If you too are trying to build great, Impact Architects is offering to sit down with you for a free consultation or provide a free trial through 90, the software platform that helps teams build great companies. If you are interested in learning more about partnering with Impact Architects or by leveraging 90 to power your own business, please go to ia.layoftheland.fm. The link will also be in our show notes. So again, I love, aspirationally, the goal is at a global scale. But you've also mentioned, and I'd love to hear more about this appetite for culture in Cleveland and how you envision Playhouse Square as an institution going forward and the impact you'd like for it to have locally.
Sure. Well, the first thing to say is Playhouse Square is not an outlier in terms of cultural impact in Cleveland. What I was really impressed about when I first came here was the number and weight of artistic institutions you have in Cleveland, big and small. I look at Karamu and Cleveland Public Theater, and there's some really terrific things going on. Then you have the Art Museum, it is one of the best in the world. And I can say that because I'm not from Cleveland. It was one of the best in the world.
Yeah. That
collection, if you're in Cleveland, you haven't been, go. It's free because of Mr. Wade back in the day. Made it free. It's phenomenal. The orchestra, and the Royal Albert Hall, we host the Cleveland Orchestra in the BBC Proms, which is the biggest classical music festival in the world. So we already knew the Cleveland Orchestra was one of the best in the world. But I don't know that Clevelanders know that. It is genuinely a force to be reckoned with artistically in the classical music world, not just in the music world. Amazing. The Rock Hall, phenomenal. We beat, I can say we now, we beat New York, Pittsburgh, Nashville, Memphis, Vegas, LA in the competition. And again, it's a bit like Playhouse Square. As I understand it, the reason that the Rock Hall was here was because something like 600 Clevelanders wrote in support of Cleveland getting it. So it's like, there you go again, grassroots support by Clevelanders for cultural institutions in Cleveland. Fantastic. So impact locally, I think, again, the resident companies is part of that solution. We can support these companies to do things beyond what they could do with their own resources. The film festival just finished, and that's a fantastic outfit. I don't know if you go to it. It's great. It's great. The films are terrific. The organization's really well run. And we love having it at Playhouse Square. It's terrific. All the theaters are being used and various things. But I think this affiliate company model also is a way that we can embed ourselves more in the culture of Cleveland. I think there was a slight sense, maybe, 10 years ago, a slight fortress mentality about Playhouse Square. Beautiful theaters, parking garage at the back. So you'd park your car, scurry across the overpass into the theater, then scurry home. So one thing and this goes back to why I'm here, I think. One thing I'm going to push is this notion of placemaking and destination.
Yeah.
And really make Playhouse Square more so, it is already, but more so a destination. And there's a whole lot of bits to that. It's about what's on the street. It's about what's on offer. It's about having things where you can graze rather than have a ticketed entry. So rather than come to a 7:30 show or a 1:30 matinee, whatever, just come in. There's a jazz club. You pay a cover charge and stay for an hour, 3 hours, whatever you like. There's a bar. You can come and have a martini or have a beer, whatever you like. There's a beer garden. There's a festival in the park. You come and bring your kids. You can have a play date. all these things where it's a reason to come down to Playhouse Square. And I know we joked about parking before. Parking, I'm learning the three biggest things in Cleveland are parking, religion, and guns. And I wouldn't put any one higher than the other. So if you're going to make Playhouse Square a destination, you can't just have one event in the park because it doesn't justify the cost of parking. I know that's terrible. I can't believe I'm saying that. I'm not clear.
No, it's reality.
It's true. But if you have a few things where there's something for the children, there's something for the adults, there's something to go and see, you may come down. And also on that placemaking point, I would also say it's a net sum neutral gain if we don't have a point of difference. So what I don't want to do is cannibalize the people that go to the Flats or West 25th or East 4th. I want to create things that bring more people from the suburbs or from out of town to Playhouse Square. I don't want to steal the audiences from other entertainment areas of Cleveland. That's really unhelpful. And the way to do that is to have an offer which is different. So we're not going to have the same offer as the Flats or West 25th or East 4th. It'll be a Playhouse Square offer. Now, it's what's the offer? Well, we'll look at the personality of Playhouse Square. We've got a bloody great chandelier in the middle of our streets, and that's a good indication. So it's probably something for, I don't know, maybe a slightly older demographic that doesn't want thumping music, but they want really cool jazz, they want really nice drinks or whatever. So we haven't quite worked out what the offer is, but it has to be different from the other offers to complement what's out there.
If you take that, ultimately one step further, kind of overlay the whole vision exercise you've been undertaking, how do you think about what success for Playhouse Square is, and for you personally in this undertaking?
Sure. I'd probably say what does success look like for Cleveland, actually. I want to make sure that Playhouse Square is intimately locked into the culture of Cleveland. I don't want us to be like Harry Potter World in Watford. So in Watford is a town north of London, and Harry Potter World is there. Warner Brothers. It's like the Battleship Galactica. I mean, it's this whole thing. Has nothing to do with Watford. It does very well. It's the number 2 tourist attraction in the UK. Watford benefits zero from that because there are shuttle buses from London or there's a train right to Harry Potter World. I don't want to be the Harry Potter World of Cleveland. I want to be part of the community and make sure we are. So I would say success looks like, and I thought of this before I actually came to live here, us to get to a point where Cleveland becomes like Nashville or Detroit or New Orleans. I mean, you say, let's go to New Orleans for the weekend. Why? Because Why? Because there's always something to do. It's great. It's great fun. There's a real good vibe. There's some good jazz and so on and so on. Nashville, well, there's country music. All the time, there's great things to do. Detroit, Motown, sort of Vegas. It's not my favorite place, but I don't want us to become Vegas. But Cleveland, I think, is almost there. And so if Playhouse Square becomes an important player in the offer, and we all, us, the Rock Hall, the orchestra, and everyone, help contribute to this brand of Cleveland being a place you can go. It's relatively inexpensive to stay there. It's pretty safe. There's tons to do. It's family friendly. There's a variety of things. The metro parks, phenomenal. And then so brand Cleveland gets known as a really cool, affordable place to go for a weekend. If we can get that message across, I'd say maybe not internationally yet, even though I am trying to surprise the world.
Yeah.
It will happen. It'll happen in time. A bit like San Francisco, I think, has kind of lost that luster a little bit in the last, say, 5 or 10 years. And somewhere like Austin, Texas seems to have gained it. It's weird how cities have their highs and lows over time. I think Cleveland is poised to have a high, and Playhouse Square can be part of that, the delivery of that high.
Yeah.
Working with our colleagues.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah, me too.
What do you wish more people understood about the business of performance arts?
Yeah, gosh. It's sort of our own fault. In our world, we have a whole world of artifice where we create something on a stage and we don't really want you to see how the lights turn on or how the makeup's put on or the fact that she's wearing a wig or there's a big effect at the end of Act 1 and so on. We're selling magic. And once you start to unpick magic, you're doing yourself a disservice. I always say, it's funny, I've worked in this industry too long now, and I saw a show last week in London. And as soon as something falls on the stage, it's the end of the act. And I mean petals, balloons, confetti, sand, bricks, paper, whatever, because you can't sweep it up. So you have to bring the curtain in and have an interval. So it's a shame because that means for me, well, I've ruined it for you now as well, and your listeners. If you see something fall on the stage, get ready to go because that's the end of the act. So you don't really want to undo the magic too much. Now, the downside of that is there are all these careers that are part of delivering the magic. And I would love to make people more aware of those, but I don't want to destroy the magic. There's a story years ago when I went to the opera. Baz Luhrmann, the film director, who's an Aussie, he was a young guy, and it was his first production out of drama school.
Yeah.
And it was an opera of La Bohème by Puccini. And he had a tiny budget, and he and his now wife were the director and designer. And he was a terrific connector. He'd sit in the wardrobe helping make the costumes, and he'd sit in marketing, signing posters for the first 100 subscribers or whatever it was. And everyone in the building felt part of that show. And everyone got to go to the final dress rehearsal. And Baz made a point at the rehearsal of standing up and thanking the finance department and the HR people and the drivers and the fundraising team, because he understood that all those roles were important for getting that show on stage. And the people that in front of the curtain are one tiny part of this massive infrastructure. And I just thought that was what a great thing to inspire young people who were working in the company to feel part of the show. So when the curtain went up on that night and you read the reviews, you felt that you had a personal stake in the success of that show. So that's what I'd love to achieve. But how do you do it without opening up the curtain too much and showing everyone the ugly parts behind the scenes?
Right.
But that's my aspiration.
No, that's fascinating. I want to ask a few maybe more personal questions. One that I was genuinely interested in, it actually goes back to what you mentioned at the beginning, which is, I think maybe in a proximity to Cleveland, there is a perception of what Cleveland is like. And until you come here, you don't know how accurate or not it is. But outside of America, maybe there isn't even a perception. So this whole idea that, Mark Twain said, travel is fatal to prejudice and bias. I would love to understand, having been in many different countries, the kind of influence of the culture of each of them respectively, as it's shaped your approach to leadership and, just running these kinds of organizations.
Yeah, it's a good question because it certainly does. I mean, the way I would behave running an organization in Australia is very different to how I behave in the UK or in London, particularly. Australia has a very entrepreneurial spirit and flavor about it. And it is a very can-do country. But at the same time, it has that slight chip on its shoulder that you find here.
For sure.
That people think, well, we wouldn't be able to do that. We're just Australians. And yet, unlike Cleveland, the world thinks Australia is a utopia. I don't know where that came from. Maybe it was Crocodile Dundee. I don't know where it came from. But the world thinks favorably of Australia. So that means a lot of people want to go there and work and live. So it's good for Australia. But the way I would behave running a company is slightly maybe more casual and more collaborative and less hierarchical than other places. When I moved to London to the ballet, and I love the British, but after about
you got the caveat in there.
Yeah. After about 6 weeks, people kept saying to me, "Oh well, that's not how we do things here." And then I finally said, "Okay, you know what? You keep saying that to me, but the way you're doing things here is not working because look at the state of the company. We're going to turn this around." So you just had to basically push ever so slightly. You can't be too demonstrative. You can never bang the table. Not that I bang the table, but you have to just do it in an English way. Little persuasion.
Yes.
Just be polite. Just bring people along for the ride.
Well, it's interesting because that's also a pattern that's come up a bunch in conversations here. But it's whenever the justification for the way of doing things is that's the way we've always done it. It's not the best justification.
It's really not. If your track record's great, maybe it is. But even then, you can push the boundaries a bit.
Absolutely, yeah.
But my observation coming here is, and I don't say this against the British, but I would say goes back to the Midwest thing.
Yeah.
It's such a glass half full mentality. People are so far, so much like, yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we've never done it before, but let's try. That's a great idea. Let's do it. And so I feel like I'm kicking an open door with the ideas I've had at Playhouse Square. And I've had quite a few, only because no one has said, please, can you just slow down? Well, actually, they have said that, but they don't mean it. They're so receptive to ideas and keen to make them work. And then I will also, based on my Olympic experience, be happily told, look, that's great, but we just need to, do it at the time when we can afford it or when it's operationally sensible and so on and so on. So happy to wait as well. Well, not happy, but prepared to. Yeah.
What would be your ask of Clevelanders? If you could wave a magic wand and fully, amplify an ask or a message or...
Great. Gosh, that's a great question. So I'm doing this Leadership Cleveland course at the moment, which I think we talked about before. And it's really, for me, it's just invaluable. There's 60 leaders of Cleveland, and we spend a day a month together, and then we have the odd retreat. And it's been so helpful meeting people from all walks of life, from health care, from business banking, not-for-profit, from churches and all sorts of things. And we have the class of 60 is split up into groups of about 6 or so. And we have one day to present each. And so our day, my group, was called Quality of Life. And as it turned out, with our little gang, I did the intro. And so we decided we were going to have the sort of flavor of the day about reminding our colleagues how amazing Cleveland is. Because there are lots of problems. You can't pretend there aren't issues here with infant mortality, especially amongst Black children. And, education is an issue and
digital divide, literacy.
Yeah, exactly. There are a lot of challenges, but we've studied a lot of these things that are part of the course. And even though these are huge problems, like child literacy really struck me as one, the stuff that Cleveland is doing is really good. Like there's some really great people doing really great things. Like one of my classmates, Jasmine Long, she runs a thing called Birthing Beautiful, which is it's a birthing center for Black women. Because if you're Black and pregnant, you're stressed, and if the midwives are all white, you're more stressed. And so Jasmine's creating a center where you won't feel stressed, so the danger of miscarriage is reduced and all sorts. So that's just one of a number of stories.
Yeah.
So anyway, our Quality of Life Day, I opened the day and I spent 45 minutes basically proselytizing about Cleveland and just saying, guys, yes, there are challenges, but there are challenges in every American city, every British city, But what we're doing here is extraordinary. And look at the assets that we have, the assets of Cleveland. And I'm saying this as a transplant. I've come here with no skin in the game, and I'm going to give you a roll call of the things here which are great about Cleveland. I said, empty motorways and, the art museum and Lakeview Cemetery and Karamu and Cleveland Public Theatre. I mean, it's extraordinary.
It is an extraordinary list.
It's phenomenal. And so I think I'm now of the view that Cleveland has great assets to sell, one of the biggest issues to solve is the attitude of Clevelanders, though. And you're a transplant. You must notice this. People that are born and bred in Cleveland say, "What on earth are you doing here? Why would you come here?"
Yes.
Yeah, and the problem is then a lot of people from Cleveland study in other cities and just don't come back. So you have these talented young people who were born and bred, and they loved Cleveland at some point, but they've gone off to Michigan or LA and they just don't come back. So it's incumbent on us who are in Cleveland to really get the story out there that actually, and it's not propaganda, it's all true. It's a great city.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the crazy part, is that it seems to be grounded in reality.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
we're not making this up.
No.
We actually, there are amazing things.
Yeah.
Well, I'll keep the magic wand in your hand for a moment. And
sure.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about, from the performance art side of things, if you could wave that magic wand again and you could bring any acts, performances, what most aspirationally would you like to have and bring to Cleveland?
Oh, gosh, that's a very hard question. Well, this is a recent conversation I had with Michael Barakiva, who's the new artistic director at Cleveland Playhouse. I would love us to have a commissioned show that is about Cleveland. And I don't mean a sort of historic panorama. I mean a really gutsy, biting story that happens to be about Cleveland. And that becomes the next Hamilton or the next Nicholas Nickleby, or, it becomes one of these incredible stories like of Mice and Men or something.
Yeah.
Imagine if we pulled that off and that story sent chills through the spines of people in theatres over the world. And it was done by the National Theatre in London, and it was on Broadway, and it played 3 years. That's like an advertorial for Cleveland. Whether the story's, about the mafia, it doesn't matter. It's about a city like this. And so the DNA of Cleveland lives through that story, and it becomes the thing that people see all over the world. New York is full of those kinds of plays and musicals. So the image of New York is shaped by the cultural devices that describe the city. Paris is the same. Why can't Cleveland have just one of those?
Yeah.
That becomes a modern classic and tells a story.
And there are incredible stories.
Incredible stories.
The history is.
The two Jewish guys that created Superman were from Glenville. I mean, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
The two guys that built the Terminal Tower, that's a kooky story. Like, they shared a room for their entire life, and they were really rich. They were brothers, and there's something. It's a wonderful story to be told. So the stories are here. In fact, one idea we've had for, we just bought this Greyhound bus terminal, right next to Playhouse Square, and we're going to make it into a performance space and do all these amazing things. And one thing we're talking about is a commissioned piece, an immersive theatre piece called Journeys, where you tell the stories of people that came to Cleveland to that bus station. And you weave the stories through in a night where you wander through, and I might hear your story, and I'll hear her story, and then his story. And wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
To like celebrate Cleveland.
Absolutely.
We should be doing more of.
We definitely should be.
Yeah.
Wow, this is all very exciting.
You thought I'd say Taylor Swift, didn't you?
Well, sure, yeah. No, but I love that. This is something original.
Totally.
Truly.
Yeah.
With that being said, I still am curious, what were of the more formative performances that you got to experience growing up? Like for me, it's Les Mis.
Yeah.
And there's a story behind that, but what are those for you?
Gosh, well, it depends which stage of my life, I suppose. I'll give 2 examples. One was in Sydney. We had the Sydney Festival every January, and it's a whole lot of theatre and dance and various things. And there's a company called Complicité, which I think they're either from France or Canada, I'm not even sure. And they did a production of Shakespeare's A Winter Tale. And, Shakespeare can be challenging. Like the first 20 minutes, everyone's like, what the hell? I have no idea what's going on. Who's he and who's she and what are they saying? But then it kind of clicks and you just understand. Then it's wonderful. But A Winter's Tale is one of the best Shakespeare's, I think. It's a tragic story. And there was one scene in this play where the court of the king, the exiled king, are coming back into the court and blah, blah, blah. And they just walk in a circle around the stage, and these peasants become the courtiers just by changing slight elements of their costume as they walk around. I'm getting goosebumps now telling you about this. It was the most phenomenal piece of theatre. And I was probably 19 or 20 years old.
Yeah.
Never read the play. And that was unbelievable. I mean, that was just extraordinary. And then the second one I'd say is one that we put on. It was a ballet. And I was at English National Ballet, and we were invited by IMG Paris, who are event producers, to put on Swan Lake on a lake in the Palace of Versailles. Now, that was pretty amazing. You know, Palace of Versailles, one of the most famous chateaux. Unbelievable. And the grounds, have you been there?
Yeah.
Like, remember the gardens of the fountains and so on? Extraordinary. So just below the palace is one called the Bassin de Neptune, which has this big golden coiled serpent. And we put a stage around the serpent and did Swan Lake there just for 3 nights. And I mean, it sold out. And the great thing, because it's, France and it's socialist.
That must have been so special.
It's so special. Tickets were like €35, and it was packed out with just local people. It was designed to encourage the Parisians to stay longer in Paris, not to all go to the coast for the summer. That was the idea. So it worked. And for the final act of Swan Lake, when the prince runs out of the palace back down to the lake to save her, and I think she dies, but anyway, it doesn't matter. And they turned all the lights on in the Hall of Mirrors to represent the palace.
Yeah.
So it was, just one of those nights. We'll never do this again. It was amazing. Yeah.
Wow. That is awesome. In reflection on all this, the work to be done, your experience that led you to this place in this moment, what do you feel is the most important thing that we haven't talked about yet?
Sure. I think the most important thing is we all need to have a joined up mentality to this to be successful. The bones are really good. The bones of Cleveland are very good. We've got the people and the expertise and the skill set in Cleveland to deliver amazing things, but we have to join up and do it together in a unified way. And it's very easy to say, be more confident of your ability and your assets, Clevelanders. But in a way, you can't be until you prove that you are, in a way. So,
right.
Success leads to success. So have a few wins, and Cleveland's had plenty of wins, and that will lead to more success. So I'd say, if I could give one message to Cleveland, to be confident of the assets and join up and collaborate, because we are stronger together. And it's an amazing city with incredible things to offer, and almost forget the jokes and the stupid stories about the mistake on the lake and all that nonsense, because I'd never heard of any of those things. And the number of times when I've been here, people said, the river caught on fire. It's like, who cares? I mean, when? Actually, I don't even care when. Just forget about it. Right. It's beautiful now, and the lake's lovely, and you have a lovely cityscape and great parks. Leave that behind.
Right.
Yeah. So, have confidence.
Have confidence.
Yeah.
Well said. Well, I'll ask you then our traditional closing question, which is, I bet you have awesome perspective on, but it's for hidden gems in Cleveland. For things that you wish other people knew about this place that maybe they don't.
How many am I allowed to have?
As many as you would like.
Oh, gosh. I'll just do 2.
Sure.
First is the West Side markets.
Yeah.
I discovered them on my tour when I first came. It's an absolute gem. That place is spectacularly good. The quality of food, the variety of food. Yeah, the parking is good. I know parking is very important to Cleveland. It's like nothing for 90 minutes, then it's $1. It's crazy. I'd say West Side Market's terrific. And the whole area around there, that's just terrific. That's one. And the second, I discovered through Leadership Cleveland, Lakeview Cemetery, and particularly the Wade Chapel. Now, have you been to that?
I haven't, actually.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so the Wade Chapel, it's called a resting chapel. And resting chapel means that it's where you put the coffins in the winter because the ground was too hard to dig up in the winter. So you put the coffins in this resting chapel.
I was like, it's not because the corpses are getting cold.
No, that's right. That's right. They're pretty cold. But you can't dig the ground. So you wait till spring and you dig the ground, put the coffins in. But the Wade Chapel was built in honor of Mr. Wade, who founded Western Union Telegram, so a very wealthy man. And his legacy was the free entry to the museum. That's the important thing. But the Wade Chapel, his grandson, I think, built it. And Tiffany, as in, there were 2 Tiffany brothers. One made jewelry, one made glass. So the glass guy had this incredible window, a Tiffany window, which is in the Wade Chapel. It went to the Paris exhibition in 1887 and came back. It's probably the best and largest example of Tiffany glass in the world.
Wow.
In Cleveland. Free in the Wade Chapel. And the interior is all Tiffany glass mosaic tiles. Tiffany designed these murals of mosaic glass, and every element of this chapel is symbolic. The chandeliers and the tiles and if you've not been, it's phenomenal. It's open. I think it's closed in the winter, but in the spring, there are volunteer guides that tell you the whole story. It's on my go-to now every time. And I've had now 14 different groups of visitors from either Sydney or London or the UK to Cleveland. They've all loved it. They all go to the Wade Chapel with me now, so it's on my list.
Wow. Amazing. No one's mentioned that before, so that's a perfect one.
Great.
Well, Craig, I just want to thank you again for coming on, for sharing your story, for being here, for championing Cleveland. I'm very excited to see what you're able to do.
Great. Yes, watch this space. That's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. If folks had anything they wanted to follow up with you about, tag along on Playhouse's journey, where would you direct them?
I'd go playhousesquare.org. Start there. Yeah, that's got all the info, everything about us. Yeah, you'll find out there.
Perfect.
That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. So if you have any feedback, please send over an email to jeffrey@layoftheland.fm or find us on Twitter @podlayoftheland or @sternhefe, JEFE. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please reach out as well and let us know. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or on your preferred podcast player. Your support goes a long way to help us spread the word and continue to bring the Cleveland founders and builders we love having on the show. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. The Lay of the Land podcast was developed in collaboration with the Up Company, LLC. At the time of this recording, unless otherwise indicated, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the company which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.